5:47 a.m. The first explosion tore through the western support zone of Sever Akmat. A fireball rose nearly 70 feet into the dark morning sky as steel roofing, drone components, and burning debris scattered across the compound. But this was not the main strike. It was only the warning. Less than 12 miles away, the remaining FP1 Firepoint drones were still flying at barely 110 feet above the ground, moving at almost 120 miles per hour, silent, low, and hard to track. Behind them were layers of Russian defense: S-400, Pol-21, S-350 Vityaz, Zoopark 1M, Book M3, and interceptor drones. Ahead of them was the real target, the UAV Training and Production Center Russia believed was protected. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more cinematic battlefield analysis and modern drone warfare stories. 4:38 a.m. The first 18 FP1 Firepoint drones crossed into the outer edge of Russian-controlled airspace, flying so low that their shadows moved across the hills before their engines could be heard. They were not climbing, they were not broadcasting, they were not moving like aircraft that wanted to be seen. Each drone held an altitude between 140 and 165 feet, skimming over ridgelines, empty roads, power cables, and broken industrial ground at nearly 118 miles per hour. Their spacing was wide, almost 600 yards apart, enough to prevent one interception from wiping out the entire formation. Ahead of them stood the first defensive wall, the S-400. Inside the battery control room, the radar crew saw nothing clear at first. No fighter jet, no missile trail, no large target. Only weak, broken streaks appearing inside ground clutter, vanishing, then returning again. The 9-1 N6E Big Bird could scan hundreds of miles, but these targets were different. Their radar reflections were tiny, unstable, and buried beneath echoes from rooftops, power lines, abandoned vehicles, and uneven terrain. Then the pattern became too regular to ignore. The commander leaned toward the screen. The signals were not birds. They were not weather. They were moving with the steady rhythm of small engines and propellers. A 4.8 N6E3 missile was launched. It accelerated violently toward the low formation, but at that altitude, physics turned against it. The radar saw the real drones and their reflected shadows at the same time. The guidance computer chose the wrong image. The missile struck empty ground, throwing dirt and fire into the air. The FP1s had already dropped lower, cut power for several seconds, and slipped through the confusion. One drone later climbed deliberately, exposing itself as a decoy. The S-400 killed it, but 17 FP1s continued forward. 5:21 a.m. The surviving 17 FP1 Firepoint drones crossed into the northern Donetsk belt, still moving low, still silent, and still holding formation after slipping past the S-400. For several minutes, everything looked stable. The lead drone reported lock on 13 satellite signals, combining GPS and GLONASS data. The flight path remained clean. The correction error stayed under 25 feet. Then the numbers began to fall. 13 became 9, 9 became 6, and after only 7 seconds, the satellite picture disappeared completely. Not weak, not unstable, gone. The formation had entered the electronic field of Pol-21. This system did not need to fire a missile or track the drones with radar. It attacked something more basic: navigation. Across the hills, antenna stations were pushing interference into the same bands the FP1 receivers needed to stay accurate. A signal from orbit travels more than 12,000 miles before reaching a drone. Pol-21 was only a few miles away. For the FP1's small receiver, it was not interference anymore. It was a flood. Now the drones had only inertial guidance left. Gyroscopes, accelerometers, and stored route data kept them moving, but every minute added risk. At nearly 119 miles per hour, even a 1.2-degree drift could push a drone hundreds of yards away from its safe corridor. 2 FP1s broke formation. They climbed slightly, widened their paths, and transmitted for just 3 seconds. That was enough to refresh coordinates for the others, and enough to expose themselves. Russian S-350 Vityaz batteries answered with 9 M96E missiles. One decoy vanished in the interception zone. Another dragged the missiles southwest. But the remaining FP1s corrected their course. Then, at 5:47 a.m., a damaged FP1 reached a Western support warehouse near Sever Akmat. Its 220-pound warhead detonated, sending a column of fire nearly 70 feet into the morning air. That blast was only the opening strike. If you enjoy clear, cinematic military storytelling, subscribe to the channel for more battlefield analysis. Because the real explosion was still ahead, and it would happen inside Sever Akmat itself. 5:58 a.m. The first FP1 Firepoint reached the roofline of Sever Akmat. It came in low, then lifted slightly in the final seconds, turning its nose downward at nearly a 44-degree attack angle. At roughly 210 feet per second, the drone crossed the outer fence, passed over the training yard, and struck the main two-story building near the center of the complex. The first detonation tore through the steel roof. A burst of fire pushed upward, while the pressure wave drove downward into the second floor. Metal panels bent outward. Internal walls cracked. The upper workshop disappeared behind smoke, sparks, and falling debris. Then the second FP1 arrived. It did not hit a new section. It struck the same opening the first blast. The pressure had nowhere to escape cleanly. It punched deeper through the damaged floor, breaking support beams and collapsing part of the assembly area below. For a few seconds, Sever Akmat was no longer a defended facility. It was a target, absorbing one impact after another. The third FP1 entered from a different direction and hit close to a storage section beneath the main building. The explosion triggered a secondary blast. Flames moved through stacked UAV components, fuel containers, engine parts, and control modules waiting for installation. A column of black smoke climbed more than 90 feet over the compound. But these 6 drones had not reached the target by chance. Minutes earlier, the remaining formation had crossed the Horlivka industrial zone. The system did not need to see them clearly. It only needed repeated motion points. Same speed, same heading, same low altitude. That data went to Book M3. A 9 M317M missile was launched with only a short radar exposure. One FP1 was destroyed. Another fell behind and was hit seconds later. The rest broke formation, dropping as low as 70 feet, changing throttle, altitude, and heading until the predicted track collapsed. That chaos bought them the final corridor. And now, Sever Akmat was 5:50 a.m. The warning reached Sever Akmat. 13 FP1 Firepoint drones were approaching from the northwest, flying below 150 feet, moving at nearly 121 miles per hour, and closing the final 16 miles faster than the defense crews expected. At that distance, another long missile engagement was no longer reliable. The target was too low, too close, and moving through broken terrain. So the Russian commander used the weapon built for this exact moment: interceptor drones. From field launchers around the compound, 20 FPV Hunter drones lifted into the air within less than 90 seconds. They were small, fast, and simple in purpose. They were not sent to observe. They were sent to collide. The first wave cut across the FP1 formation from the right flank. One FPV Hunter struck the wing root of an FP1. Another hit the rear propeller assembly. A third slammed into the lower fuselage, forcing the drone to roll and drop toward the hillside outside the industrial strip. In under 1 minute, 3 FP1s were gone. But the Ukrainian formation did not rush straight into Sever Akmat. Instead, the surviving drones pulled into a wide arc, dragging the FPV Hunters away from their strongest control zone. On a tactical screen, it looked like hesitation. In reality, it was a battery trap. The FPV Hunters could reach nearly 132 miles per hour. But at full speed, their endurance fell sharply. After 11 to 14 minutes, several began losing altitude. Control links weakened behind the ridgelines. One dropped into an open field. Another hit the roof of an empty warehouse. Others failed before they could return to the perimeter. Russia then launched Yoka interceptor UAVs from closer positions near the facility. Two of them hit the lead elements of the FP1 group, knocking both drones down outside the fence. The defense had worked, but not completely. Only 6 FP1s remained, and they were now just over 1 mile from Sever Akmat. 5:59 a.m. Sever Akmat was already burning. The first impacts had ripped open the main building, but the attack was not finished. The 6 remaining FP1 Firepoint drones were no longer moving as one straight line. They split into a rough hexagonal pattern, approaching from different angles across the training yard, the workshop side, the storage section, and the outer repair area. At this distance, there was no need for GPS, no need for radio correction. The optical cameras in their noses had already locked on to the visible shapes of the compound: the main roofline, the assembly hall, the vehicle bay, and the darker entrance to the lower storage level. The 4th FP1 came in from the eastern side and struck the high-tech workshop. Inside were UAV shells, engine mounts, wiring sets, control boards, propeller assemblies, and unfinished airframes prepared for deployment. The blast tore through workbenches and storage racks, destroying equipment that had taken months to gather. Within seconds, small fires spread across plastic casings, fuel residue, and packed components. The 5th drone targeted the outer armored vehicle repair section. Several Tiger armored vehicles were parked in the maintenance lane, some partially disassembled, others waiting for field repair. The FP1 struck near the center of the bay. The explosion threw fragments through the service area and ignited fuel and oil around the parked vehicles. At least 4 Tiger armored vehicles were left destroyed or heavily burned. The 6th FP1 arrived last. By then, the main structure had already lost part of its roof and several internal supports. Smoke was pouring through the upper floor, and flames were visible through broken windows. The drone's camera adjusted in the final second, selecting the section of the building that had not fully collapsed yet. It dived lower, crossed the courtyard at around 205 feet per second, and struck the remaining load-bearing compartment. The final detonation pushed through the weakened structure. A section of the central building folded inward. Concrete panels cracked, steel beams twisted, and the interior rooms disappeared beneath dust, smoke, and fire. The physical damage was severe. The UAV assembly line was no longer operational. The high-tech workshop had been destroyed. The lower storage area had suffered a secondary explosion. The first-floor living and training spaces were badly damaged. The external vehicle repair section was no longer usable. According to post-strike estimates inside the story, around 62 to 68 Russian personnel were killed or incapacitated, including UAV trainees, technical staff, and members of the Sever unit. The officer known by the call sign Beret was also reported among the losses. But the deeper impact was not only the building. Sever Akmat was part of a larger UAV chain. It trained operators, prepared drone crews, assembled systems, stored components, and supported units on the Donetsk front. Losing it meant fewer trained pilots, fewer prepared airframes, fewer repaired vehicles, and slower replacement cycles. The FP1s had not just damaged a facility, they had cut into the system that kept drones moving from workshop tables to the battlefield. By the time the smoke rose over Sever Akmat, the most important question was no longer how many drones had been destroyed. The real question was, how many had survived long enough to reach the target? Out of the original 18 FP1 Firepoint drones, most never made it to the final impact zone. Some were lost to S-400, others were forced into electronic darkness by Pole 21. S-350 Vityaz fired into the deception corridor. Zoopark 1M helped guide Buk M3 toward the formation. Then, FPV Hunter drones and Yoka interceptor UAVs cut down more of them near the perimeter. On paper, that looks like a successful defense, but on the battlefield, the result was different. Only 6 FP1s needed to survive. 6 drones were enough to damage the main building, disrupt the UAV assembly line, hit the high-tech workshop, burn the outer repair section, and break the rhythm of a training and production center that supported operations across the Donetsk front. That is the part I find most important. Modern air defense is still powerful. Systems like S-400, S-350 Vityaz, and Buk M3 can intercept drones, missiles, and aircraft under the right conditions. But this story shows the pressure they face when the threat is small, low, slow enough to hide in ground clutter, but organized enough to sacrifice part of the formation for the mission. In my opinion, the future of drone warfare will not be decided by one perfect weapon. It will be decided by combinations: low-altitude flight, decoys, electronic warfare resistance, optical navigation, route planning, and the ability to keep moving even when GPS disappears. A single drone is vulnerable. A swarm with a plan is different. It can lose aircraft and still continue. It can force expensive systems to fire repeatedly. It can make defenders choose between protecting the radar, protecting the facility, or chasing decoys. And if even 25 to 35% of the formation reaches the final zone, the damage can still be serious. That is why low-altitude UAV tactics are becoming one of the hardest problems for modern militaries. They do not replace missiles, aircraft, or artillery, but they create a new layer of pressure, one that is cheaper, flexible, and difficult to stop completely. From my point of view, Sever Akmat was not just a strike on a building. It was a warning about where the battlefield is going. What do you think? Will layered air defense adapt fast enough? Or will low-cost drone swarms continue to find gaps? Share your opinion in the comments.